Take off the jacket. Judge Robert Brennan's voice cut through courtroom C like a command he expected to be obeyed instantly. Thomas Carter, 82, didn't move. The old man stood at the defense table, straight-backed, gray eyes locked forward. His weathered green field jacket carried 3 rows of ribbons and 1 star-shaped medal on a pale blue ribbon. I said, "Take it off." Brennan leaned forward, irritation flashing across his face. "Those medals are fake, surplus store garbage. You don't walk into my courtroom wearing costume jewelry." The gallery shifted uncomfortably. A few people whispered. Most just stared. Carter's hands stayed at his sides, perfectly still. The kind of control that doesn't come naturally. It's drilled in, beaten in, forged under circumstances this judge couldn't begin to imagine. "Sir, my client has every right," his public defender started. "Your client," Brennan interrupted, "is either deaf or thinks a chest full of tin gives him special privileges. It doesn't. Not here." He pointed at the bailiff. "Remove the jacket. Now." The bailiff hesitated. Something about the old man's silence stopped him cold. "Before we continue, if you've ever been underestimated because of your appearance, type honor below. And tell me where you're watching from. This story proves that true dignity can't be stripped away by arrogance." I read every comment. The case was simple, a parking violation. Thomas Carter had left his motorcycle in a loading zone outside the county courthouse for 11 minutes while he went inside to pay a previous ticket. Someone had called it in. Now he stood before Judge Brennan, a man known throughout Northwood County for his harsh sentences and his particular disdain for what he called entitled veterans. Emily Ross, Carter's public defender, was 26 years old and fresh out of law school. This was her 14th case. She'd seen Brennan's cruelty before, the way he enjoyed dismantling people piece by piece. But this felt different. Worse. The judge wasn't just administering justice, he was performing humiliation. "Your Honor," Emily tried again, keeping her voice steady, "Mr. Carter served his country with distinction. His military record—" "I don't care if he says he stormed Normandy," Brennan snapped. "Half the men his age claim they're war heroes. You know how many fake medals get sold online every day? Thousands. It's an insult to real veterans." He jabbed a finger at Carter. "That star hanging on the blue ribbon? That's supposed to be the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How few people have actually earned it?" Emily's throat tightened. She glanced at her client. Carter hadn't spoken once since entering the courtroom. His intake form had been sparse. Name, address, date of birth. In the box marked military service, he'd written one word. Yes. Nothing else. No branch, no rank, no years served. Just yes. The judge's voice rose. "I'll tell you how rare it is. Fewer than 3,500 have been awarded in American history. And this man," he gestured dismissively, "wants me to believe he's one of them. Standing here for a parking ticket?" The absurdity of it hung in the air. The great hero, reduced to traffic court. "Sir," the bailiff said quietly, standing near Carter now, "do you want to remove the jacket?" Carter's gaze shifted. For the first time, he looked at the bailiff, a younger man, maybe 40, with the thick build of an ex-Marine. Their eyes met. The bailiff saw something there, something that made him take an involuntary step back. "No," Carter said. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute conviction. "I don't." Judge Brennan's face flushed red. "Then you're in contempt of court. Bailiff, add a $500 fine and prepare to remand him into custody." The courtroom door opened. A woman in her 50s entered, late, carrying a briefcase. She was a local attorney waiting for her own case. She glanced at the scene, the old man, the judge's fury, the tension, and slid into the back row. She'd seen Brennan's theatrics before, but something about this felt wrong. The old man wasn't defiant in the way defendants usually were. He was calm, disturbingly calm. Brennan stood, his black robes billowing. "Let me be clear. I am tired of men of a certain generation thinking a uniform they claim to have worn gives them a free pass. You parked illegally. You refused to show respect to this court. And you stand here in that ridiculous jacket like it's some kind of shield. He pointed at the medal. Stolen valor is a federal crime, Mr. Carter. Wearing a Medal of Honor you didn't earn, that's not just disrespectful. It's pathetic. Emily felt her hands trembling. She looked down at her notes. There had to be something, some way to stop this. Then she saw it, a small detail she'd missed before. On Carter's jacket collar, barely visible. A pin, a simple crest, a sword behind a castle tower. She didn't know what it meant, but it looked official, military, real. Your Honor, she said, her voice stronger now. I request a brief recess to verify my client's service record. Denied, Brennan said flatly. This has gone on long enough. 5 minutes, Emily pressed. That's all I need. Brennan waved a hand. You have 2 minutes. Don't waste my time. Emily practically ran from the courtroom. Emily's heels clicked frantically down the marble hallway. Her heart hammered. 2 minutes. She ducked into an empty conference room and pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She typed quickly, U.S. Army Pin Sword Castle Tower. The results loaded. 1st Special Forces Group, Green Berets, Fort Lewis, Washington. Her breath caught. This wasn't some weekend warrior. This was Special Forces, elite, the kind of soldiers who didn't advertise what they'd done. She found a general number for Fort Lewis Public Affairs and dialed. It rang twice. Fort Lewis, Public Affairs, Specialist Morrison. My name is Emily Ross, she said, the words tumbling out. I'm a public defender in Northwood County. I have a client, an elderly veteran. He's being held in contempt of court because the judge thinks his medals are fake. He's about to be arrested. Ma'am, we can't intervene in civilian legal matters. His name is Thomas Carter, Emily interrupted. He's wearing a first group pin. Please, the judge is calling it stolen valor. There was a pause. Then the sound of rapid typing. Spell the last name. C-A-R-T-E-R. First name, Thomas. More typing. Then a sharp intake of breath. When the specialist spoke again, his voice was completely different. Sharp. Urgent. What courtroom? Ma'am. Courtroom C, Northwood County Courthouse. Do not let your client leave. Do not let them take him anywhere. We are on our way. The line went dead. Emily stood frozen, phone still pressed to her ear. We are on our way. She didn't know what that meant, but hope surged through her chest like electricity. She ran back to the courtroom. Inside, the situation had deteriorated. Judge Brennan had descended from the bench and was standing uncomfortably close to Carter, invading his space. The old man hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. He stood like a statue carved from stone. You know what I think? Brennan said, his voice low and venomous. I think you bought that jacket at a thrift store. I think you pinned on some medals to feel important, to get discounts at restaurants, to have people thank you for your service. He leaned closer. But there's no service to thank, is there? You're just a sad old man playing dress-up. Emily slid back into her seat. Your Honor, I've made contact with... I don't care, Brennan snapped. Bailiff, take him into custody. The bailiff, whose name was Marcus Webb, former Marine Corps, 2 tours in Iraq, stepped forward again. He'd been uncomfortable this entire time. He'd seen combat. He knew men who carried themselves like Carter. Men who didn't need to prove anything. Men who'd been through hell and come out the other side, carved into something harder than the rest of humanity. Sir, Marcus said to Carter, his voice respectful, I need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back. Carter finally moved. He turned slowly, his movements deliberate. As he did, his jacket shifted slightly. Marcus saw something he hadn't noticed before. Under the rows of ribbons partially hidden, a purple heart, then another and another. 4 purple hearts, 4 separate combat wounds. Marcus's hands hesitated with the handcuffs. The woman in the back row, the late-arriving attorney, leaned forward. She could see the medals more clearly now. Bronze Star, Silver Star, 2 of them. These weren't cheap replicas. They were worn, faded, real. The kind of real that comes from decades of being carefully maintained, cherished. Judge Brennan, she called out. unable to stay silent. "I think you should stop." Brennan whirled on her. "Excuse me?" "Those medals," she said, standing. "They're real. Look at them. That's not costume jewelry. Sit down, counselor, or you'll join him in contempt." She sat, but she didn't look away from Carter. Neither did Marcus. Neither did half the gallery. A shift was happening in the room. A slow, collective realization that they were watching something terrible unfold. Something they'd regret being part of. Judge Brennan grabbed the Medal of Honor hanging from Carter's jacket, the pale blue ribbon, the star. He yanked it, pulling it close to his face. "This," he hissed, "is an insult to every person who ever served honorably." Carter's jaw tightened, the first crack in his composure. His hands, which had been perfectly still, curled into fists. Not in aggression, in restraint, in the monumental effort of holding back something vast and dangerous. Emily stood. "Your Honor, I've contacted Fort Lewis. They're sending—" "I don't care if they're sending the president," Brennan roared. "This ends now." But it was already too late. Because at that exact moment, three things happened simultaneously. The bailiff's radio crackled to life. "All units, be advised. High-priority military transport incoming. Federal jurisdiction may apply." A phone in the gallery rang. The court reporters. She answered, listened, and her face went pale. And the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Two soldiers entered first, both in army dress blues. Uniforms so sharp they could cut glass. They moved with synchronized precision, taking positions on either side of the entrance. Parade rest, eyes forward, faces impassive. The courtroom fell silent. Then a third figure stepped through the doors. He was tall, broad-shouldered. His dark green uniform was immaculate, every crease perfect, every medal gleaming. But it was the shoulders that captured attention. 3 silver stars on each side, a lieutenant general. Judge Brennan froze, his hand still gripping Carter's Medal of Honor. General William Hayes didn't look at the judge. Not yet. His eyes swept the courtroom with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd commanded thousands. He was scanning, searching. His gaze found Thomas Carter. Everything about the general's demeanor changed. The professional mask cracked. Something like reverence crossed his face. He began walking down the center aisle, his polished boots striking the floor with deliberate, measured steps. Click, click, click. Each footfall was a punctuation mark, a drumbeat of authority that made Judge Brennan's posturing seem like a child's tantrum. General Hayes stopped 3 feet from the defense table, from Thomas Carter. The two men looked at each other. Something passed between them, a silent conversation, decades in the making. Recognition, respect, brotherhood. Then General Hayes did something that sent a shockwave through every person in that courtroom. He snapped to attention, the sharpest, most perfect position of attention most of them had ever seen. His right hand came up in a salute so crisp it seemed to slice the air itself. His gloved fingers touched the brim of his cap. His arm formed a rigid line of respect. "Sergeant Major Carter!" The general's voice boomed, clear and strong. "It is an honor to be in your presence, sir." The words hung in the stunned silence. Sergeant Major, not private, not specialist, Sergeant Major. The highest enlisted rank in the United States Army. Slowly, as if waking from a long sleep, Thomas Carter straightened. The weariness fell away from him like a shed skin. His shoulders squared. His spine straightened to its full height. He brought his own hand up, the movement stiff with age but no less precise, and returned the salute. For 5 full seconds, the two men held the salute. General and Sergeant Major. The highest officer and the highest enlisted. Mutual respect crystallized into a single perfect moment. Judge Brennan's hand fell away from the medal. His face had gone from red to ashen white. General Hayes lowered his hand only after Carter lowered his. Then he turned. Slowly, deliberately. He pinned Judge Brennan with a gaze so cold it seemed to drop the temperature in the room. "I am General William Hayes, commanding officer of the 1st Special Forces Group at Fort Lewis," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. And you have just committed one of the most egregious acts of disrespect I have witnessed in 34 years of service." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. Official, embossed with the seal of the Department of Defense. "Since you question this man's credentials," Hayes continued, "allow me to enlighten you." He began to read. His voice resonated with barely controlled fury. "Thomas James Carter, enlisted United States Army, 1961. Served with distinction for 28 years. Multiple tours in Vietnam with the 5th Special Forces Group. Military Assistance Command, Vietnam. Studies and Observations Group." Emily's breath caught. She'd heard of SOG, Special Operations Group, the most classified, most dangerous unit of the Vietnam War. They did things that still weren't fully declassified. General Hayes continued, his voice building. "Awards and decorations. Bronze Star with V device for valor. 3 awards. A ripple went through the gallery. "Silver Star. 2 awards. Gasps now. The Silver Star was the 3rd highest military decoration. Distinguished Service Cross, the 2nd highest award, given for extraordinary heroism in combat. Purple Heart, 4 awards. 4 times wounded in action. 4 times returned to combat. And this one." General Hayes pointed at the medal Judge Brennan had touched. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every word cut like a knife. "This medal you called costume jewelry. This is the Medal of Honor. Awarded to then Staff Sergeant Carter for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." The courtroom was utterly silent. Not a breath, not a movement. On March 17, 1968, Hayes read from the citation, "Near the village of Khe Sanh, Sergeant Carter's patrol was ambushed by a reinforced North Vietnamese Army company. Despite being wounded twice, Sergeant Carter single-handedly assaulted and destroyed 2 enemy machine gun positions. He then carried 3 wounded soldiers, one at a time, across 200 meters of enemy fire to safety. Upon reaching the evacuation point, Sergeant Carter returned to the fight." General Hayes folded the paper. The rage in his eyes was volcanic. "This man's jacket holds more honor than this entire courthouse. He is not a defendant. He is a national treasure. And you, Judge Brennan, saw fit to humiliate him over a parking ticket." The words hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Thomas Carter stood perfectly still, but something had changed in his eyes. The mention of March 17, 1968 had transported him somewhere else. The courtroom dissolved around him. The polished floors became red mud. The fluorescent lights became the pale gray sky of a Vietnamese dawn. He could smell it. The jungle, thick and rotting and alive. Cordite, blood, fierce sweat that soaked through fatigues and never quite washed out. He was 28 years old again, Staff Sergeant, 5th Special Forces, leading a 6-man reconnaissance patrol through triple canopy jungle west of Khe Sanh. They'd been inserted 72 hours earlier to locate an NVA supply depot. They'd found it, called in the coordinates. Now they were trying to reach the extraction point. The ambush came at dawn. First light, the moment when shadows play tricks and exhausted men make mistakes. The machine guns opened up from both sides, interlocking fields of fire, professional, devastating. His point man, a kid from Montana named Davies, went down in the first burst. Then Williams, then Kowalski. Carter hit the mud, his car 15 up and firing, but they were pinned, cut off. The NVA had them in a kill box. He could see Miller, the youngest, barely 19, trying to crawl behind a fallen tree. Another burst. Miller's leg exploded in a spray of red. The kid's scream cut through the gunfire. "Staff Sergeant?" Miller was crying, blood pouring between his fingers as he tried to hold his femoral artery together. I can't! Carter made a decision. The kind of decision that defines a life or ends it. He rose from cover, fully exposed. Every NVA gun in that jungle swung toward him. He ran at the nearest machine gun nest, firing in controlled bursts, 20 meters, 15. The bullets stitched a line in the mud inches from his boots. His left shoulder erupted in white-hot pain, first wound. He didn't stop. He pulled the pin on a grenade, cooked it for 2 seconds, and threw it into the spider hole. The explosion tore through the position. The second machine gun was 30 meters to his right. He sprinted through the kill zone, changing magazines on the run. His right side burned. Second wound didn't matter. He flanked the position and emptied a full magazine into it. Silence. Temporary. Precious. He ran back to Miller. The kid was gray, dying. Carter ripped off his own belt, made a tourniquet, pulled it tight enough to make Miller scream. Then he lifted all 180 pounds of him onto his shoulders in a fireman's carry. The 200 meters to the evacuation point were the longest of his life. The NVA fire resumed. Heavier now, mortar rounds. He could hear them whistling in. The first one hit 20 feet to his left, showering him with dirt and shrapnel. He didn't stop. Miller was crying, praying, bleeding through the tourniquet. Carter's legs burned, his lungs screamed, his wounds throbbed. 1 foot in front of the other. He reached the clearing. The medevac was already there, rotors screaming, door gunners laying down suppressive fire. Carter handed Miller to the crew chief, turned, and ran back. Davies was alive. Barely. Carter carried him. Another 200 meters. Another lifetime. Then Williams. Unconscious. Heavy. Carter's vision was tunneling. Blood loss. Shock. Didn't matter. He made the run. When he finally collapsed at the LZ, he'd saved 3 men. The patrol's other 3, Kowalski, Jenkins, and Rodriguez, hadn't made it. Carter had tried to go back for them. The helicopter crew chief had physically restrained him. The Medal of Honor citation didn't mention that Carter had fought the crew chief, or that he'd wept, hard, racking sobs in the helicopter on the way back to base. It didn't mention that he'd spent 3 days in the hospital before going AWOL to attend the memorial service for the 3 men who died. It didn't mention that he still carried their dog tags, even now, 57 years later, on a chain under his shirt. The citation only mentioned the heroism, not the cost. Thomas Carter blinked. The courtroom came back into focus. General Hayes was still talking, still reading details from the service record, but Carter barely heard him. He was looking at Judge Brennan, and he didn't see an arrogant man anymore. He saw a scared one, a man who'd made a terrible mistake and was only now beginning to understand its magnitude. Emily Ross was crying quietly at the defense table, not from sadness, from overwhelming pride in a client she'd met just 2 hours ago. A man who'd said almost nothing, revealed nothing, yet carried the weight of a nation's gratitude on his worn shoulders. Marcus Webb, the bailiff, was standing at attention. Full military attention, even though he wore no uniform. Old habits. He recognized what he was seeing. A living legend. The woman in the back row had her phone out, recording. This would be on the news within the hour. Viral by tonight. The judge who'd humiliated a Medal of Honor recipient. General Hayes finished reading the citation. He folded the paper with sharp, precise movements. Then he turned back to Judge Brennan, and his voice dropped to a deadly quiet. As for you, Your Honor. The title dripped with sarcasm. You have a problem with veterans. I would suggest you rectify that immediately. Judge Brennan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His face had gone from white to a sickly gray. He looked small behind his imposing bench, powerless, stripped of the authority he'd wielded so carelessly minutes before. General Hayes wasn't finished. I have already been in contact with the office of your state's governor, he said, his words measured and deliberate, as well as the head of the State Judicial Conduct Commission. They are very, very interested in today's transcript. I've also forwarded this incident to the Department of Veterans Affairs and the American Legion. I imagine your career of public service is about to come to a rather abrupt end. The finality in his voice was absolute. This wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Judge Brennan's career was over. Not suspended. Not under review. Over. Emily watched the general, awestruck. This was power. Real power. Not the petty tyranny of a small-town judge, but the institutional might of the United States military protecting one of its own. Furthermore, Hayes continued, pulling out his phone, I'm declaring federal interest in this proceeding under Title 18, U.S. Code Section 704. which prohibits the false claims of military honors. Since you've accused Sergeant Major Carter of stolen valor, I'm obligated to investigate." He tapped his phone screen. "I'm sending you his complete service record now, 63 pages, every mission, every decoration, every commendation, every single scar on his body is documented in these files." Judge Brennan's own phone buzzed. He picked it up with shaking hands. The blood drained further from his face as he scrolled through page after page of Carter's military history. "You will note," Hayes said coldly, "that Sergeant Major Carter retired in 1989 with full honors. He served 28 years. He holds the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, 3 Bronze Stars with V device, 4 Purple Hearts, the Defense Superior Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, and 17 other awards and decorations. He is one of fewer than 70 living Medal of Honor recipients. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" Brennan couldn't speak. He just stared at his phone screen, his hands trembling. It was Thomas Carter who broke the silence. "General Hayes," Carter said quietly, his voice soft but clear. He placed a gentle hand on the general's arm. "William." He didn't know. Hayes turned, surprised. "Sergeant Major, with all due respect, that's not an excuse." "He didn't know," Carter repeated. He looked at Judge Brennan, and there was no anger in his eyes, no triumph, just a deep, weary sadness. "The medals aren't the point, son. They never were." He stepped forward, closer to the bench. Everyone in the courtroom leaned in, straining to hear. "These ribbons," Carter said, touching his chest gently, "they're just reminders. Reminders of men I served with. Men who didn't come home. Every time I put on this jacket, I remember Bobby Jenkins from Texas, who died pulling me out of a burning helicopter. I remember Mike Rodriguez, who took a bullet meant for me. I remember 100 moments when other people's courage saved my life." His voice remained steady, but his eyes glistened. "The Medal of Honor isn't mine. Not really. It belongs to Davies and Williams and Miller, the men I carried that day. It belongs to the thousands of Green Berets who've done things just as brave, but never got recognized. I wear it because someone has to remember them." He looked directly at Judge Brennan. "Respect isn't something you demand with a gavel, son. It's something you give freely to the person standing in front of you, whether they're a general or a janitor, whether they're wearing a uniform or a worn-out jacket. That's the only lesson here." The words landed like hammer blows, simple, profound, undeniable. Judge Brennan's composure finally shattered. His face crumpled. He sank into his chair, the fight completely gone out of him. He started, his voice hoarse. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." General Hayes watched the judge carefully. Then he looked at Carter. "Sergeant Major, what would you like to see happen here?" Carter was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'd like to pay my parking ticket and go home." A shocked laugh burst from someone in the gallery. The tension broke. Not completely, but enough. Enough for people to breathe again. Hayes nodded slowly. "The ticket is dismissed, expunged. The contempt charge is dismissed. Every word of today's proceeding will be sealed under federal order, except for the portions I'm forwarding to the Judicial Review Board." He turned to Brennan one final time. "You have a choice, Judge. You can resign quietly and retain some dignity, or you can fight this and spend the next year watching your name dragged through every media outlet in the country. I recommend the former." Brennan nodded numbly. He looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "Court is adjourned," he whispered. The gavel sat untouched on his desk. He didn't have the strength to lift it. General Hayes turned to the 2 soldiers still standing at attention by the doors. "Gentlemen, escort Sergeant Major Carter to his vehicle. Full honors." The 2 soldiers moved in perfect synchronization, flanking Carter on either side. Not as guards, but as an honor guard. Carter looked at them, both young men, probably early 20s, and saw himself 50 years ago. Earnest, proud, unbroken by what was to come. "At ease, soldiers," Carter said gently. "I can walk on my own." "With respect, Sergeant Major," one of them said, "we'd be honored to accompany you." Carter smiled. A real smile, the first one anyone in that courtroom had seen. "All right, then." As they began to walk toward the exit, something extraordinary happened. Marcus Webb, the bailiff, snapped to attention and saluted. His former Marine training overrode everything else. Carter paused, returned the salute with crisp precision, then continued walking. The woman in the back row stood. She didn't salute. She was a civilian, but she placed her hand over her heart. Others in the gallery followed. One by one, people rose. Some saluted. Some placed hands over hearts. A few simply stood in respectful silence. Emily Ross felt tears streaming down her face. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to be part of something so powerful. She'd thought she was defending a simple parking violation. Instead, she'd witnessed the restoration of honor. As Carter reached the doors, he paused. He turned back to look at Judge Brennan, who sat slumped behind his bench, a broken man. "Your Honor," Carter called out. The title wasn't sarcastic. It was sincere. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we do after. Then he was gone. The two soldiers at his side, General Hayes following behind. The courtroom remained silent for a full minute after they left. No one knew quite what to do, how to process what they'd just witnessed. Finally, Judge Brennan stood on shaking legs. He looked at Emily. "Ms. Ross, I owe you an apology as well. You tried to tell me." Emily didn't respond. She simply gathered her files and walked out. 3 weeks later, the story had gone viral, just as predicted. The video recorded by the woman in the back row had been viewed 47 million times. Major news networks had picked it up. The headlines varied, but the message was consistent. Judge humiliates Medal of Honor recipient, gets destroyed by general, and the salute heard round the world. Judge Robert Brennan resigned after 1 week. The Judicial Review Board had been prepared to remove him, but he'd taken General Hayes's advice and stepped down quietly. His law license was suspended pending ethics review. The state legislature, responding to public outcry, passed emergency legislation requiring all public officials to complete training on military honors and veteran recognition. It was unofficially called the Carter Act. Thomas Carter wanted none of the attention. He declined every interview request, every speaking invitation, every ceremony in his honor. He just wanted to go back to his quiet life. But on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after that day in court, Carter was having breakfast at his usual diner, a small place called Morton's on the edge of town. He sat in his regular booth, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. The door opened. Carter glanced up and froze. Judge Robert Brennan stood in the doorway. He wore jeans and a simple polo shirt. No robes, no authority. Just a man who looked older and smaller than he had in the courtroom. Their eyes met. Brennan hesitated, then walked slowly to Carter's booth. "Mr. Carter," he said quietly, "may I sit down?" Carter gestured to the seat across from him. Brennan slid in, his hands fidgeting on the table. "I wanted to apologize," Brennan said, not meeting Carter's eyes. "What I did, what I said, there's no excuse for it. I was arrogant. I was cruel. And I was wrong. I'm deeply, deeply sorry." Carter took a slow sip of his coffee. He studied the man across from him. A man humbled. A man broken by his own pride. "I heard you're not on the bench anymore," Carter said, his tone neutral. "No," Brennan admitted. "I'm not. I'm working at my brother's insurance agency now. Answering phones, mostly." "Good," Carter said. Brennan flinched. "A man shouldn't have a job he doesn't have the heart for," Carter continued. He pushed a menu across the table. "The coffee here is good. Breakfast is better. You hungry?" Brennan looked up, finally meeting Carter's gaze. He saw no anger there, no judgment, just simple human kindness. Yes. Thank you." Carter raised a hand, signaling the waitress. She came over, took their orders, and left. The two men sat in companionable silence for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" Brennan said finally. "Sure. How did you forgive me so quickly?" "What I did," Carter interrupted gently. "I spent 28 years in the Army. I saw the worst things people can do to each other. I learned something important. Holding on to anger is like carrying a rucksack full of rocks. Eventually it breaks your back. Better to put it down and keep walking." He looked at Brennan with those steady gray eyes. "You made a mistake. You've paid for it. What you do next, that's what defines you. Not what happened in that courtroom. Brennan nodded, unable to speak. The waitress returned with their food. They ate breakfast together. Two men who'd been adversaries, now just sharing a meal. When Brennan stood to leave, he extended his hand. Carter shook it firmly. "Thank you," Brennan said, "for the coffee and for the lesson." Carter smiled. "Take care of yourself, Judge." "I'm not a judge anymore." "You're still a man," Carter said. "That's enough." 6 months after that breakfast, Emily Ross received a package at her office. Inside was a framed photograph. It showed General William Hayes and Thomas Carter standing together at Fort Lewis, both in dress uniforms, both smiling. At the bottom, in Hayes's handwriting, "To Emily, thank you for making the call. You saved more than a case that day. You reminded us what we're protecting." Emily hung it on her office wall. Every time she felt discouraged, every time the job seemed pointless, she looked at that photograph and remembered that sometimes the law does exactly what it's supposed to do. Robert Brennan never practiced law again, but he did something else. He began volunteering at the VA hospital, helping veterans navigate disability claims and legal issues. He didn't advertise it, didn't seek recognition. He just showed up, week after week, trying to make amends in the only way he knew how. One afternoon, he ran into Carter there. The old veteran was visiting a friend, another Green Beret from the old days. They nodded to each other. No words needed. Just acknowledgement that both men were doing the work of being better. Thomas Carter continued his quiet life. He rode his motorcycle on sunny days. He met friends for coffee on Tuesday mornings. He attended memorial services for fallen soldiers and stood in the back, silent and respectful. He never spoke about what happened in that courtroom. When people recognized him from the viral video, he simply smiled and changed the subject. But something had changed, not in him, but in the people around him. The story had spread beyond Northwood County, beyond the viral video. It became something larger, a reminder that heroes walk among us every day, often unseen, unrecognized, asking nothing in return for what they've given. The two soldiers who'd served as Carter's honor guard that day, Corporals Martinez and Johnson, requested transfers to recruiting duty. When asked why, they both said the same thing. "We want to find more people like Sergeant Major Carter. We want to make sure the next generation understands what service really means." General Hayes retired 1 year later. At his retirement ceremony, when asked about the proudest moment of his career, he didn't mention the combat deployments or the awards or the commands he'd held. He mentioned the day he walked into a county courthouse and saluted a man who deserved it. Emily Ross eventually left the public defender's office. She opened her own practice, specializing in veterans' rights. On her business card, beneath her name, was a simple phrase, "Honor first." And Judge Brennan, former Judge Brennan, found something he'd never expected. Peace, not through power or authority, but through service. Through helping the people he'd once dismissed. He would never wear a robe again, but he'd found something better. Purpose. The weathered green field jacket with its 3 rows of ribbons and star-shaped medal still hangs in Thomas Carter's closet. He wears it on special occasions, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, and every March 17th when he visits the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., and traces his fingers over 3 names carved in black granite: Davies, Rodriguez, Kowalski, the men who didn't come home, the men the medal really belongs to. Stories like Thomas Carter's remind us that heroes walk among us every day, often unseen, asking nothing in return for what they've given. True dignity cannot be stripped away by arrogance or cruelty. It lives in the quiet strength of those who've served, who've sacrificed, who carry the weight of honor without ever demanding recognition. To everyone who typed honor and shared where you're watching from, thank you for standing with our heroes. Subscribe for more stories like this and unsung American heroes. See you in the next one.